are very blessed tonight to have a brother here. And I have really enjoyed buying his publications. If you do not have this brother's books on file, then you really are not a serious student of ancient Kemet. If you don't have his books, if you don't have Nile Valley Contribution to Civilization and the Browder file and the 2 books by him and his daughter, you have really missed the mark. You really missed the mark. The Nile Valley Contribution to Civilization is necessary for every family. And there's a workbook to go along with it. That's necessary. That's the most workable publication that we have. And so you all are asked when you get ready to leave here tonight to certainly go by and see if there's any more left. Some of y'all better tip back there now if y'all really know what y'all are in for, because y'all don't want that book to leave without y'all having purchased it. It is a deep book. And if you're having problem with the questions in the program this week, if y'all can't answer these questions, just go through them, look at them real quick while y'all saluting Anthony Browder as he come down here. If y'all having problem with these questions, y'all better jet back there and get that book. Y'all hear what I'm saying? Y'all better jet back there and get that book if y'all having problem with these questions. Because you are not a serious student if you're having problem with these questions. And the answers can only be obtained tonight from the Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. And certainly if you have never been to Washington, D.C., on an African-centered educational tour. See, some of y'all send y'all children down there with Europeans every year. Y'all send them down there with Europeans to mess up their minds. All right? And they don't have the foggiest notion of what they're looking at. And certainly can't identify with their own blood. Anthony Browder is the cure to that. It should be so many black folks going to Washington having this brother take them around on tours that he couldn't even get up here tonight. Y'all hear what I'm saying? But we don't even know that we contributed to nothing. Some have heard about Benjamin Banneker, but we think he was just a surveyor. All right? So we don't even know that. But this is how important. We went down there this year and had a great time. For those of you who went, am I right? A great time in Washington, D.C. It is a must. Go back to your school districts and tell them they must take their children to Washington and let Anthony Browder be the tour guide. If you got children, that's a must. In fact, you should have your children out here tonight. We're serious. This is serious work. You know, it's sad for us to have our children look in the mirror and black as they are and see a white Superman as a reflection. As their hero. That's a real tragedy. That's a real tragedy. You want to know what happened to your children? Why are they going wrong? And they got you in family court and criminal court, and you spending thousands of dollars to these crackers, when the only thing you have to do is go back there and buy a book and get their head straight. But you'd rather give $5,000 to Mr. Goldstein, all right, to get some and buy Power Rangers, than to go back there and get a book and get somebody's head straight. Wake up, black folks. This book ought to be in every school district. Tomorrow you ought to be calling your school boards and challenging them. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, if they won't treat you right, why do you think they will teach you right? What could be in your minds? Whatever it is, the mind buster, the lighthouse of Kemet is here in the house tonight and is coming down the runway. Everybody get on their feet and get a breeze of this brother as he strolled down the aisle. Our brother, Anthony T. Browder, Washington, D.C., the Institute of Karmic Guidance. Let's give a warm round of applause to our keynote speaker for tonight, Brother Anthony T. Browder. Let's give. To start right now. All right, brother.
Brooklyn. All right, let's do it again. I am always pleased to be here, to be back with my extended family, because the spirit in this house is unlike the spirit in many houses throughout the nation. I'm here because you all have taken the time out of your busy day to come out on such an ungodly evening. You know, I hate this time of year. The cold, this is not weather that is meant for African people. But I thank you all for coming out and for supporting Brother Maddox and his organization and for coming to hear me speak. And I trust that the words that I share with you this evening will make you feel that it has been time well spent. Before I begin my comments this evening, I want us to take a few minutes to acknowledge a brother that we need to send some prayers out to this evening. A brother by the name of Listervelt Middleton, who is the host and producer of a program that comes out of South Carolina. The program is entitled For the People. It's a program that's been running for 19 years now and has featured all of the famous African and African American historians and scholars and scientists and you name it. The brother has featured these personalities on his program. Brother Listervelt has been facing for a number of years now a major health challenge. He has multiple myeloma, cancer in the bone marrow. He was treated for this disease several years ago, and the cancer was in remission for 15 months up until August of this year. Tomorrow, Brother Middleton goes in for a bone marrow transplant. His son, Bakari, who's 15 years old, donated his marrow yesterday to help sustain his father's life. So I'm going to ask that you all this evening, when you leave here, before you go to bed tonight, to pray to whatever God you pray to, and ask the Creator to send a special blessing to Brother Listervelt so that we can heal him. There's also going to be a program next weekend in South Carolina for Brother Listervelt. A number of scholars are traveling from all over the country to come and speak at this benefit to help raise funds to defray his medical expenses. And so I ask you all to keep Brother Listervelt in your hearts and minds so that we can ensure that he will be with us. He will continue to bring knowledge and information to the people for at least the next 55, 60 years. All right. All right. All right. Now, as usual, when I come here, I like to talk about our history and our culture, yes, but I also like to present the information from a very practical standpoint. All right. I always like to talk about things that we can use today. Specifically, I like to talk about information that we can begin to incorporate into our lives to help transform the quality of our lives. And so when Brother Maddox called me about a week and a half ago and asked me if I would be available to come down, I of course said yes, because I knew that this meeting on Wednesday, this Wednesday, would give me an opportunity to share some information with you all that I feel is vitally crucial to our survival as a people. What I specifically want to focus on this evening is the importance, the significance of this particular time of year, all right. The Christmas season, the holiday season. Right. And I want to talk about it from an African perspective, from a cultural perspective that also takes into account its historical and astrological, astronomical significance? See, because I'm convinced that there are some peculiar happenings that go on during this so-called holiday season, happenings that if you are aware of and begin to take advantage of, will allow you to be able to transform your quality of life. Right. Very simple, very basic information, like most of the information about ourselves, our history, and our culture, very simple, very basic information, but as long as that information is withheld from you, you will never be able to do what you should be doing with knowledge in order to transform your life. So I want you all to listen intently, to take notes, and to begin to think about applying some of this information within the course of the next 2 to 3 weeks. One of the things that prompted my thoughts on this particular topic was a conversation I had with a good brother by the name of Ra. He's the author, as a matter of fact, he's the editor of, served as the editor of Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. He's also the author of a book on Medu entitled Let the Ancestors Speak. And he was talking about the significance of the language of ancient Kemet, the beauty of the language of ancient Kemet, and talked about it from the context of Medu Neter literally meaning God's words or the writing of God. He said that he refers to it as an ideographic form of communication that uses symbols to represent ideas, as opposed to letters which have no meaning whatsoever until they're placed in a certain combination that they spell certain words. All right. In Kemet, ancient Egypt, the role of the scribe or the priest was to impart the meaning of those symbols that were incorporated within the word of God or the writing of God. His role was to impart the meaning of those symbols to those who were prepared to receive that knowledge so that they can then receive the word and act on it. Knowledge and information is made available to you, but if you don't know what to do with it, it means nothing. That's one of the things that the brothers and sisters discovered this past June when we did the African Center tour for them. One of the things that we point out is the fact that in your midst today are symbols that are incorporated within the architecture, within the layout of the city, symbols that tell you who you are, where you came from. But if you don't know how to interpret those symbols, then you just walk past the building, drive past the building without realizing that the truth is right before your very eyes. Right. In ancient Kemet, Medu Neter, the symbols consist of images which were derived from nature, which were derived from the environment. Plants, animals, water, people, all symbols that everybody can relate to, symbols that told those who had an understanding and a deep appreciation for these symbols, told them what they could begin to do, what they could begin to understand as a result of studying this knowledge and information. The tradition of relating nature to one's environment is an integral part of all African languages. It's an integral part of African culture. We relate to our environment. We gain understanding and wisdom based upon studying every element that exists within our society, because each element means something special to us. It is the means by which African people understood their relationship to the Creator, that is, the being that was responsible for creating all of these elements that exist within the society. Within traditional African languages, metaphors were used to communicate to the initiated and the uninitiated simultaneously. In other words, you could present a general message, and those who had no idea what you were talking about would get one meaning from it, only hear one aspect. But those who were trained to look for the deeper meaning would hear something totally different and would know how to respond with that information. The initiated derived one meaning from the conversation, while others usually derived a totally different meaning while one conversation was taking place. So in other words, what I want you to begin to be aware of is the fact that there are several ways that you all can begin to look at and process information. That was one of the things that I talked about the last time I was here. When Africans were enslaved, we were forbidden to speak our language, to practice these traditions, to begin to communicate with the Creator as we knew the Creator to be. But we found an effective way of communicating, sometimes in our songs. So if we listen to some of the so-called Negro spirituals, we will hear messages that were encoded in the music. Messages that were rich with a metaphoric language that was designed to communicate to the initiated, i.e. those who understood that there was a message in the music. For example, you all are familiar with the song "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, Coming Forth to Carry Me Home." That was a call to those initiated within the plantation to begin to prepare to leave the plantation. The chariot is getting ready to take you home, to take you out of here. But those who could not be trusted heard the song and thought it meant something else. There was a code, there was a message incorporated within that song. The other spiritual, "Down by the Riverside," was a directive to those Africans where they should meet. Telling you where to meet, telling you when to meet. And as you prepared to escape from the plantation, you needed to have some directions that would help you find your way as you travel north. There was another song that gave them codes as to how to find their way north. That code was "Follow the Drinking Gourd." What's the drinking gourd? The drinking gourd is a metaphor for the Little Dipper, Polaris, the North Star. And within that song was the code to look up to the sky, to follow that particular aspect of the heavens in order to differentiate the Big Dipper from the Little Dipper, in order to find the North Star, to find your way to freedom. All right. We have some very powerful and effective ways of communicating our message to those people who were interested in freeing themselves, liberating themselves. There was another song that I'm sure you all have heard, a song called "Wade in the Water." Wade in the water. What's the significance of wading in the water? See, because when you were getting ready to leave the plantation, when you're going down by the riverside, when you're going to follow the drinking gourd, you know that once you leave, the white man's going to come looking for you. He's going to bring his bloodhounds to track you down. So what do? You wade in the water to throw off the scent so the bloodhounds can't follow you. Very simple and very practical means of ensuring that you can make it out of hell and find your way north. There's also a very powerful message found in a song that's commonly referred to as a Negro national anthem, a song that I heard people in here singing a little while ago. "Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring." We need to look at this. We need to look at this song and the messages in this song. James Weldon Johnson wrote it, 1900. It's a song that talks about the Creator. It's a song that has some very important messages for us, but in order to really understand the messages in the song, we have to understand something about the person who wrote the song. James Weldon Johnson was an agnostic. He was a person who believed in a creative spirit, but he also felt that it is difficult, if not impossible, for man to know God. But yet there is a creative spirit. And if you analyze the words to "lift every voice and sing" from the vantage point of James Weldon Johnson, a person who realized that the concept of God was a concept that was sometimes too deep for the average person to really comprehend. And if you break down the stanzas of that song, then you'll find some very important metaphors. The first stanza speaks of the present time. Begins with "lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring." Talks about today, right now. The second stanza speaks of our ancient past. "Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening ride." He talks about the things that we went through as a people. The third stanza speaks of our future, in which he tells us what we have to do based upon where we were where we are now and what it is that we need to be doing in order to ensure our survival. The third stanza says, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, God who has brought us far along the way, God who has by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever on the path we pray. Least our feet straight from the path, our God, where we met thee, least our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. Now, what was James Weldon Johnson talking about? True to our God, true to our native land, if he was an agnostic. What was he telling us? True to our God, true to our native land references the concepts of the Neteru, or the concepts of the Creator, which sprang from the minds of African people, as perceived by Africans in their native land. He's telling you specifically who you should focus your attention on. Our God from our land, not him. Shadow beneath thy hand. What is he talking about? Shadow beneath thy hand. What is a shadow? Shadow is the shade cast by a body that intercepts the rays of light. The shadow is a metaphor which represents the presence of a force that is greater than oneself. That is the Creator, what we may call God. The force is symbolized by the sun, which is the source of light that makes the shadow. It makes the shadow visible. So the force is always there, but the shadow is that which reaffirms the presence of that force. Symbolic metaphors that talks about a profound understanding of the African concept of the Creator. The African's reference to the sun as a symbol of God is a subject that must be discussed, particularly at this time of year. There are numerous cultural celebrations which pertain to light and the sun. Celebrations that go on at this time of year. A few days from now, some people on the other side of town are going to be celebrating Hanukkah. That is what? The festival of light. All right? On Christmas. December the 25th. Some folk on another side of town are going to be celebrating the birth of the sun. S-U-N, S-O-N, it was still spelled the same way 2,000 years ago. What are they talking about? After Christmas, some people on this side of town are going to be celebrating Kwanzaa. 7-day African festival of the first fruits, which is directly related to light. You don't get the fruits, you don't get the harvest without the presence of the sun, or the power from the sun that makes the food manifest. So all of these festivals that celebrate light are directly related to a celestial phenomenon that takes place in the heavens and has a profound effect on every living thing on planet Earth. By nature of the fact that we were born in America, born in a Christian society, we have been programmed to embrace the holiday spirit. We've been programmed to embrace it. Some of us who have come into our African minds have begun to see this whole thing differently, but we need to understand our programming. And how sometimes when you hear Nat King Cole sing the Christmas song, you want to chime in a little bit. Or when you hear Donny Hathaway sing This Christmas, you want to chime in a little bit because of that programming. All right, so it's in us. We need to understand that, but then be able to take it to the next level and understand what it really talks about. So my objective this evening is to help you decipher the metaphors related to this highly spiritual time of year so that you can maximize all of the benefits that are available to every single one of you. Again, this is knowledge and information that you aren't going to learn in school. You certainly won't learn it in church. Why? Because it's not about giving you information to free yourself. It's about giving you a certain amount of information so that you will remain connected to that source that is feeding you, spoon feeding you the information, okay? So hopefully you all will hear my words this evening and understand the spirit with which the words are being imparted to you. And if you think about it, again, focusing initially on Christmas, if you think about it, we need to realize the truth that no one knows the day that Jesus was born. No one knows. They don't have the faintest idea. If your pastor is truthful and honest, then he or she will tell you, we don't know when Jesus the Christ was born. So if that's the truth, then all of these songs that sing about the birth of Jesus are not telling you the truth. All of these pictures that you see in the books about Jesus being born in the manger on this day are not telling you the truth.
All right. Talk to us.
The celebration of Christmas, the celebration of the birth of Jesus the Christ on December the 25th, did not take place until 350 AD. Historical fact, historical reality. The reason why that date was adopted by Constantine was because it was a date in which the people of the world, specifically the people of the world that Constantine wanted to conquer, they had celebrated this date for over 3,000 years as the birth of the sun. Now, what does that mean? Let me give you a reference, and I need to cite this reference specifically in order to pay honor to the brother that recorded it in a book, John G. Jackson, who has since passed on to the realm of the ancestors. The book was entitled Introduction to African Civilization. The citation comes from page 144, and I can still remember how I felt when I read that passage and what it did to me. John Jackson said, in Egypt 3,000 years ago, the birth date of the sun god was celebrated in the temples the 25th of December, 3,000 years ago. Why? Because it was the first day to lengthen, obviously, after December the 21st, the day of the winter solstice. At the midnight hour, on the very first minute of the 21st of December, the birth of the sun was commemorated. At that time, the sun was in the zodiacal sign of Capricorn, which was known as the stable of Aegeus. So the infant sun god was said to have been born in a stable. Shining brightly on the meridian was Sirius, the star from the east. While rising in the east was Virgo, the Virgin, the astrological constellation of Virgo the Virgin, and the line of the horizon was passing through her center. The whole concept of a virgin birth is written in the stars. To the right of Sirius was Orion, the great hunter, with 3 stars in his belt. And those stars lie in a straight line and point toward Sirius. And in the ancient times, these 3 stars were known as the 3 kings or the 3 magi. So all of this stuff that has been inculcated into Christian lore was based upon astronomical knowledge that was practiced thousands of years before the birth of Jesus the Christ. So if Constantine had this desire to conquer the rest of the world and to impose a new religious ideology on the minds of the people that he conquered, then one of the first things that he had to do was to ensure that he could minimize people's resistance to this new concept. So he selected a date that they had already set aside as a holiday and imposed his holiday on theirs. After their children died, they will forget the holiday of their ancestors and celebrate the holiday of the people who had just recently mentally enslaved them. So in the winter solstice, or Christmas, the sun is in the southernmost position of the sky. And after that time, it begins to travel northward across the ecliptic, and then at the vernal equinox, or Easter, it passes over the celestial equator. This passing over the sun from the south to the north of the equator was the origin of the festival of Passover. The whole idea of Passover literally talks about the sun, the S-U-N, passing over the equator. All they did was to change the terminology and make the S-U-N the S-O-N, and had the Passover. At that particular point in time, the sun was resurrected in the northern hemisphere. And so it was said that the sun, the S-O-N, was resurrected. That's where all of these concepts and ideas come from. When this event was recorded 3,000 years ago, the sun passing over the equator 3,000 years ago, the sun was situated in the sign of Aries, the ram or the lamb. And so it became a symbol of the sacrificial lamb, the Passover lamb. All of this stuff is directly related to aspects of astronomy. This time of year coincides with the spring equinox, which is also symbolic of the resurrection and the return of life. During the spring, life literally springs forth from the black earth. Vegetation comes back into existence. It is a time of year when birds build their nests and lay eggs, and animals then give birth to the young, which represents a continuation of the life cycle. It is a time of rebirth and regeneration on the earth. There were two prominent symbols that were used in ancient Africa to represent this time, this transformation, this regeneration of life. And those two symbols, particularly symbols that were used in Kemet, were symbols of the egg, which represents the potential for new life that exists within this container, as well as the rabbit. The rabbit was a symbol of abundant birth. Why? Because the rabbits have the ability to produce multiple births in a very short period of time. The rabbit was a symbol that was always associated with fertility. And so it was these two symbols in the newly emerging Christian religion that led to the myth of the Easter bunny and the Easter eggs. All right. Think about it. All right. Rabbits don't lay eggs, do they? What's the significance of that? Why do we every Easter talk about the Easter bunny, hide the Easter eggs? What is that all about? That is us in our ignorance playing out the celebration of the return of the life cycle, which occurs in the spring. Think about Easter. December the 25th is always Thanksgiving. It's always Christmas, correct? December the 25th is always Christmas. But when is Easter? Easter is a movable holiday. Why? Because Easter is always the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. It's all connected to celestial phenomena that takes place in the heavens. It has nothing to do with the story that has been imposed on your subconscious mind. Astrology and astronomy have always been integral elements incorporated within the Christian tradition, but they just never told you the significance of it. You just go along with the program. Just as Easter is always the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox, Christmas is always after the 4 days of the winter solstice. The word solstice means the sun is still. During that 4-day period of time, traditionally from December the 21st through December the 24th, the sun is still. What does that mean? The length of the day does not increase nor decrease significantly. Think about this. Think about how the sun affects your consciousness. In the fall, when you have the fall equinox, which generally falls around September the 21st and September the 22nd, equinox means you have equal night and equal day. 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours at nighttime. Then after the fall equinox, the night begins to increase by approximately 1 minute every day. So it gets darker earlier, correct? The nights get longer and longer and longer. The night is symbolic on one level of the unknown. The night on one level is symbolic of death.
All right.
Wow.
In the fall, when the sun passes over the equator, and if you live in the northern hemisphere, when the sun passes over the equator and begins to move toward the south, the absence of sunlight leads to the death of all vegetation. That's why we call the season fall. Leaves fall off the tree. Everything dies without the sun, without the light, without the energy that comes from the sun. And things will continue to die as the nights get longer and longer. And so when you come to December the 21st through December the 24th, that 4-day period of the solstice when the sun is still, the length of the day does not increase nor decrease significantly. The sun stops its southern motion and is still in the sky for those 4 days. And during the time that the sun is still, that spiritual energy, that electromagnetic energy that is responsible for the development and maintenance of life is in a special position where it is literally bombarding the earth with a certain level, a certain quality of energy that you all have the ability to tap into and harness if you knew what to do at that particular point in time. After that 4-day period, then on December the 25th, the days begin to increase by approximately 1 minute per day. So then on that day, it was a day of celebration. Why? Because the sun, the giver of life, was born. Very basic reality.
All right.
Astrology. Don't be fooled. Don't be fooled by this word astrology. It is a word that means star, logos, astrology, star logos, star knowledge, knowledge of the stars, knowledge of the heavens. This information was known to have a profound influence on human thought and behavior thousands of years ago. That is the reason why, that is precisely the reason why temples that were constructed in Africa were oriented to specific positions of the sun. Temples were either oriented to the sun at the time of the summer solstice, the sun at the winter solstice, or the sun during the time of the equinoxes. Why? Because of this particular interplay between the exchange of energy between the sun and planet Earth. We are affected by these celestial bodies whether you understand it or not.
All right.
Today is the day of the full moon. Today is the day of the full moon. What's the significance of that? What effect does this heavenly body have on us? Well, if you stop and think about it, very basic reality, the moon, particularly during the time of the full moon, has an effect on the waters of the earth and creates a high tide. Why? The earth is here, the moon is here, the presence of the full moon here attracts the water to it and creates a high tide. The earth is 3/4 water. So if the moon has the power and the ability to attract all of the water on the earth to it, then what makes you think the moon doesn't have an effect on you all, who are also 3/4 water? Huh? You ever give any meaning, any thought to the term lunatic? It was a term that was coined in England in the late 1800s by persons who I guess we would call today psychologists, who in the mental institution that they were running in England noted that there were people who were crazy all the time, but there was a certain segment of the population that only went crazy during the time of the full moon. during that 3-day window of the full moon, the day before, the day of, and the day after. And so they noted this behavior and recorded it over a prolonged period of time. And they referred to those people whose behavior changed dramatically during the time of the full moon. They were referred to as lunatics, from the Latin word luna, meaning moon.
All right.
Is it any coincidence that the moon undergoes its metamorphosis every 28 days? Undergoes this cycle every 28 days? And sisters also undergo their cycle every 28 days. And the moon was a symbol that was associated with sisters?
All right.
Huh?
Uh-oh.
Is it any coincidence that if you go to any hospital, any police station in the world, and look at their records, in the hospital you will find that more elderly people would die of strokes and heart attacks during this 3-day window of the full moon. More women will be prone to give birth during this 3-day window of the full moon. Why? Because it's this electromagnetic attraction of the moon on fluids within the body of the planet Earth and within the body of human beings.
All right.
Police stations. Go to any police station and look at their record books, and you will find that they will usually have an increase in certain violent acts during the time of the full moon. Go to an emergency room. Ask the nurses, ask the doctors who work in the emergency room, and they will tell you that they get some of the most bizarre cases imaginable. Somebody stabbed 150 times with a toothpick, crazy stuff that people do during this time. And one of the things that we just have not really come to understand is how we are affected. All human beings are affected by these celestial bodies. In the Browder file, 5 years ago, I made reference to one particular instance in talking about astrology and so-called psychic phenomena, an instance where the United States government, the United States military used psychics in order to determine the activity of the enemy during World War II. And there were some folk who read that and said, well, this Browder is just talking about some metaphysical nonsense. Well, you all just read in the paper last week about the Army spending $20 million in a project. How much? $400 million. All right, the number goes up the more they investigate the matter. But the United States government uses psychics to study certain spiritual and psychic phenomena, remote viewing. Why? Because the Soviets were doing it since the 1970s. This is an aspect of reality that folk don't talk about. Why? Because one, they can't explain it, and two, they can't control it. Can you imagine white folk trying to block out the moon, trying to keep that energy from affecting you? Trying to send the sun moving backwards throughout the sky so that you all won't be able to tap into the energy that's available to you during certain times of the year. They can't do that, but they can change your mind. They can cloud your mind with misinformation so that you become so deluded by lies, fantasies, that you don't use your natural talents to take advantage of the energy and the powers that you have within. So that's what this whole thing is all about. We are taught that Jesus was born on December the 25th. We're told that 30 years later he was baptized by John the Baptist. And Jesus becomes known as the fisher of men. And then later he is known as the sacrificial lamb after he is crucified. But what others know, particularly those who fed you that story, what they know that December 25th is the time of the solstice, or the birth of the sun. They know that 30 days later, the sun is in the sign of Aquarius, the water barrier. They know that 30 days after that, the sun is in the sign of Pisces, as in the fisher of men, and 30 days after that, the sun passes over the equator and is resurrected in the sign of Aries, the lamb. All of this stuff talks about certain knowledge and information that is literally recorded in the stars and has played itself out for thousands of years and will continue to play itself out for thousands of years. This knowledge and information is mathematically sound. It is precise. And if you understand the movements, if you understand the relationships of the planets and the stars, then you are able to predict with accuracy what is going to be happening at any point in time in the future. That is the reason why 200 years ago, when the Europeans were in the process of creating Washington, D.C., they hired this African by the name of Benjamin Banneker. Banneker's role specifically was to use the most technically sophisticated instruments of the day, compass, the sextants, and other implements to study the stars, the sun, and the moon. That's all he did. That's all he did. He recorded the movement of these heavenly bodies in his notebook in the evening, and then every morning the European, General Ellicott, whose job it was to oversee the survey of the city, came to the site, took Banneker's notes, and then used them to instruct the Europeans who were assisting him to establish the boundary line for the 10 mile by 10 mile by 10 mile by 10 mile square, which was to be Washington, D.C. The whole city is laid out in accordance to certain signs and symbols in the heavens. Why? Because they understand that power exists within the heavens, and that if you can duplicate a template, then you will create an environment where this energy can be harnessed. One of the things that we talked about on the Afrocentric tour was the symbolic significance of 16th Street, and any of you all have ever been in Washington, D.C., 16th Street is one of the primary streets in the city. If you look at the original plan of Washington, 16th Street was a street that divided the city, or divided this 10 mile by 10 mile by 10 mile square through the north and south. It is a street that is 6.4 miles and leads directly into the White House. What's the symbolic significance of that? That street, 16th Street, represents a corridor of spiritual energy. Spiritual energy that is funneled down 16th Street, directed into the house of the President of the United States. It is a corridor of spiritual energy. That is the reason why there are over 60 churches, Masonic organizations, religious institutions on this one street, more than any other street in the city of Washington, D.C. Folk know something that you all don't know. They've been studying your ancestors. And they have taught you to reject the knowledge and the wisdom of your ancestors. Why? So they can use that information to empower themselves. So what we have to do, sisters and brothers, is begin to move beyond studying.
All right.
As my brother Anthony Ross says, we got to move beyond hotel.
All right.
All right. We got to begin to put these words and these concepts into action. It makes no sense at all for you all to be talking about how great we were if we suffering today. All it means is that you ain't using the knowledge. So if you're not using the knowledge, don't even mess with it. It's not a toy. It's not a game. One very important reality is the fact that, we have a habit of calling the ancestors, pouring libation and calling the ancestors to come into our midst.
All right.
And what we don't realize is that this is a force, this is a power that is very real, that is not meant to be played with. And you call the ancestors into your presence, and shucking and jiving, don't have nothing for them to do, then guess what? They're going to stop coming. They stop coming, and then you really begin to catch it. You thought you'd catch a nail from a white man? Let your ancestors turn their backs on you and see what happens. This is some serious stuff. We're living in some very serious times that demand your attention, that demand your heart and your soul. Think about this. During this time of year, we sing the carols, we see the celebrations, the pronouncement of brotherhood, peace on earth, goodwill toward man. And yet, if you study the history of this country, it never seems to fail that right around this time of year, they always get ready to send our soldiers overseas for some conflict. Getting ready to go to Bosnia now. A couple of years ago, they were going to Somalia. A couple of years before that, they were going someplace else. What does all of that mean? Right. They understand this time of year. This is a time of peace on earth, goodwill towards men. What does that mean? Peace on earth, goodwill towards men. Peace means to become silent or quiet. Earth is a symbol not just for the planet, but for your body. Good references God. Will is the power of the consciousness to determine a particular course of action. And man means mind. So this process of peace on earth, goodwill towards man, literally means to quiet the body and manifest God's consciousness in the mind. When do you celebrate peace on earth and goodwill toward man? Well, the Creator says, the universe says, you do it during the time that the sun is still. That's when you're supposed to be still. That's when you're supposed to have peace on this body and focus your mind. Because whatever you focus your mind on during this 4-day period represents the process of conception. Of conception. You are planting the seeds of specific thoughts. And whatever seeds you plant during this very important time of year will begin to manifest themselves in the spring during the equinox when life comes forth from the earth, from the body. So it's a special relationship that exists between the sun and planet Earth, between the sun and you. Those who understand that time will use it to throw you off of your spiritual center. So instead of focusing on peace on earth, you're worrying about whether or not your brother is going to step on a landmine in Bosnia. This is by design. So what are you going to do? In spite of all of this nonsense, in spite of all of the mines that have been laid in your mind, huh?
All right.
In spite of all of those minds, there are still things that you can do to overcome these obstacles. Because believe it or not, sisters and brothers, you all got the power, always have had it, always will have it. But if you don't believe it, if you don't exercise your energy, then folk who have less power than you will be able to play you like a toy. All because you give up your will, because you don't understand who you are. During the time of the winter solstice is the primary time to cultivate peace on this body and goodwill within this mind. That's what you're supposed to be doing. The nights of the winter solstice, December the 21st, and this year the solstice falls on December the 22nd. But the nights of these 4 nights of the solstice are literally the silent nights and the holy nights. All right. When all should be calm and bright inside. During this time, you should not be drinking. Alcohol, that is. Which they call spirits. Isn't that interesting? Why do they call it spirits? Because what this alcohol does is change your vibratory level of consciousness such that the spiritual energy that exists within the universe begins to manifest itself in you. Think about this. We as individuals are called persons. Person. P-E-R-S-O-N. Person means through sana, through sound. Our bodies are vessels through which sound, through which vibration, through which energy move. All kinds of energy moves through our body. Our bodies are sacred temples.
That's right. All right.
So what energy do you allow to move through this body, to move through this temple? You can either invite energy that is going to allow you to do what it is that the Creator put you here on earth to do, or you can drink certain things and eat certain things that will make you act like a fool. All right, so think about it. During this time of year, you all should not be drinking. You should not be partying. All these Christmas parties this time of the year are specifically designed to throw you off your spiritual center, to keep you unbalanced. You should not be stuffing your body with food.
All right.
It is a time for prayer, meditation, and fasting. And yet, we have been encouraged to eat, drink, and be merry. During this time of year, it's certain times to eat, drink, and be merry. But this ain't one of them.
All right. All right.
Think about it. Think about it.
All right.
During this time of year, particularly between Thanksgiving, Misgiving. All right, thank you, brother. I stand corrected. Between Misgiving and New Year's, more alcohol is consumed than any point in time of the year. We eat more food. We stuff ourselves during this highly spiritual time of the year. A time when we should be preparing ourselves to receive spiritual energy, preparing ourselves to establish, to lay down the foundation for the next 60 days, the next 90 days. But instead, we do all kinds of nonsense. Why? Because somebody else is pulling the strings. During this time of year, we behave in a certain manner, and then comes this January the 1st, the new year, and we make all of these New Year's resolutions, which we've broken by the 10th, the 12th of January. Why? Because we do not approach these resolutions from a position of seriousness. We make them when we're drunk, or we make them when we recovering from a hangover. All right, well, I ain't gonna drink that much no more. I'm gonna cut down. So, in very plain and simple English, because that's the language that we're forced to communicate in very plain and simple English, I'm asking you all to begin to take time out, particularly to take time out December the 22nd through December the 25th. And however you do it, because on one level, it doesn't matter if you follow the program all the way through, but however you do it, take some time to yourself to sit down and do some fasting, whether you go throughout the day and not eat and eat in the evening, or if you want to just spend those 4 days and fast all the way through. You need to engage your body in some activity that is going to allow it to heal and allow it to reconnect with the Creator. If you do that during that 4-day period of time, if you begin to select just 3 basic goals for yourself, 3 basic and realistic objectives for yourself, think on them intently, and then let them go. You'll find that you'll begin to be moved in a direction and in a manner which will begin to allow those thoughts and ideas to come into manifestation. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I want you to focus on, again, this time of year. When we sing songs, Christmas carols, particularly a song about the 12 days of Christmas, 12 days of Christmas, which includes December the 26th, December 25th, plus the 12 days that follow, represents a process of spiritual transformation, which becomes manifest on January the 6th, which is the day of the Epiphany, which is the day that represents the spiritual transformation of Jesus the Christ. That's the reason why 13 is a spiritual number. January the 6th is the Epiphany. It commemorates the revealing of Jesus as the Christ to the three magi, symbolic of a process of focusing your mind during a prescribed period of time through which you will then begin to receive specific gifts. It talks about you. It talks about your body. If you follow these instructions, these guidelines that I talked about, then you will become the anointed one. You will become Christ-like. The word Christ is a title. It's not a name. It means the anointed one who is endowed with specific benefits that you can receive. During Christmas, during this time of year, we're often encouraged to spend money that we don't have, to buy gifts for people we don't like. And we spend this money in shops. We buy these gifts from merchants who don't even celebrate Christmas. So they will freely put up the decorations. Why? Because they know it's another time of plenty. Means the foolish, those who don't have the slightest idea what time it really is, they're going to give up all of their money, and as a result, they're going to spend the rest of the year trying to get back what they gave up. You realize it's a lose-lose situation. You can never recover as long as you buy into the fallacy. There's another way, and we need to begin to start thinking about that other way. We need to begin to find ways to survive during this period of madness. And let me just share a thought or an idea with you. And it's something that I began to become aware of after I made my first trip to Egypt, 1980. And one of the keys that helped me come into this level of awareness was the fact that I am formally trained as an artist. So I see things from a certain artistic perspective, from a symbolic perspective, and most artists, or most people who are creative, whether they work with their hands or paint or dance or sing, most artists are usually inspired. That means to be inspired literally means a spirit or a state of consciousness comes into you and moves you to create. So from a very basic and fundamental level, artists or people who create are people who are able to tap into the source of nothing, what we call nothing, and find creation. So in other words, what I'm saying is that nothing is not nothing in the traditional sense of the word. Nothing is the source of everything. So if you can begin to still your mind, focus your mind on a specific idea, objective, or goal, then you will begin to be drawn to that idea, because everything that exists, before anything exists within the physical world, it begins first as an idea in the mind of a person. The clothes that you have on your back, the car that you drive, the chairs that you're sitting in, the building that houses us, all of these things begin first as an idea, a thought in someone's mind. That's where everything comes from. This source that we call nothing, which is a great reservoir for knowledge and information. The challenge is, how do you tap into it? And there's a very simple process. You have to be able to focus your thinking. And let me just share this story with you, because it had a profound effect on me and still does. In that 10 years ago, when I was before I started writing, before I started, really lecturing on African history and culture, I was still doing freelance design and advertising. And one of the problems that I used to always encounter was meeting a deadline. If I had a deadline of Thursday at 9 o'clock to meet with the client to show them a layout for a business package, a letterhead, envelopes, business card, or cover design, or something like that. At that particular point in time in my life, I would sometimes allow thoughts of fear and anxiety to enter my mind. What if I can't complete this assignment? What if they don't like what I do? What am I going to do? How am I going to get, I need that money to pay the rent. I need that money to take care of other responsibilities. What am I supposed to do? And as I was sitting up at the drawing board late one night thinking about that, I said to myself, I wish I could do what my grandfather used to do. I wish I could tap into that level of creative energy that my grandfather used to tap into. When I was a child, 5 or 6 years old, my grandfather would always build things with his hand, and I would help him. And I noticed that he never, ever drew things down on paper. He just would walk around and look at what he wanted to work on. He would determine how much wood he needed. He would go down to the hardware store, get the wood, get the nails. I would come back, I would hold the wood while he sawed it. I would hold this while he hammered it. And before you know it, he built a cabinet. He built a garage. He built a fence. And I said, well, obviously my grandfather was tapped into a level of creativity, a level of consciousness that allowed him to make something out of nothing. And I said to myself, if I could think like my grandfather, then maybe I could tap into that same source. And I found myself sitting down at the drawing board late that night. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. Found myself just reflecting on that thought, thinking about my grandfather, watching him work on one of his building projects, seeing him look at nothing, and then over a period of weeks, watching him look at his finished product. I saw him doing that, and I saw myself as him doing that. I saw myself sitting down at the drawing table trying to come up with an idea for my client. Then I saw myself meeting with my client, showing them the ideas that I had drawn. I looked at the ideas. I said, that one's pretty nice. That one's even better. But I sure like that one. And then I sat down at my drawing board and drew what I saw myself looking at 3 days in the future. And guess what? When I met with my client, it went down just like I saw it going down. What I'm saying is something very basic and elementary, something that we are not taught as human beings that have been created in the image of the Creator. We have at our disposal the ability to tap into the source of creation. Question is, what do we want to create? Because you have to understand that there are other forces that exist within this universe that you also have to deal with. One of the most significant forces is Ma'at. Wow. Reciprocity, balance, harmony, order, truth, and justice. That should guide and direct all of your thoughts. Because if you have the ability to tap into the source of creation and manifest your creation, then Ma'at must be your motivating force. You must do these things because it is the just thing to do. It is the correct thing to do, because whatever you do is going to come back to you. There is a reciprocal relationship that exists between you and the universe, between you and the Creator. Whatever you focus your attention on, you will bring into manifestation. They say that a mind that is hopeful, confident, and courageous, determined on its set purpose, and is attuned to that purpose, begins to attract to itself out of the elements things and powers that are favorable to that purpose. So whatever you give your attention to will begin to come into manifestation. So the issue is, look in your life. Look at your life. What is the quality of your life? Are you content with things? Is there room for change? Room for improvement? If we live in a world in which the Creator has given us the tools to create heaven or hell, then what tools have you chosen to use? If you have the tools to be able to minimize health challenges, then why do you catch the flu every year? If you have the ability, if you understand that money is energy, it's power, that's why they call it currency, it's energy, and it is to be used to bring certain things into manifestation, then why is there always an absence of it in your life? It means that you're not using the tools properly. We've been trained to think and to believe that we got to work for somebody else instead of understanding that we have the ability and the right to work for ourselves. Every person in this room has a gift, has a talent that sets you apart from every other person. Your responsibility in this life is to find that gift. And the only way you're going to find it is by cutting off the radio, cutting off the television, staying away from Mickey D's, and spending some time to get in tune with yourself. Because when you do that, then the nature of the universe is to respond to your thoughts, to respond to your directives. So the extent to which you are going to move toward manifesting your creative ability is the extent to which you will be able to do it. You've got the power to transform your life.
All right.
There's a way that you can survive during this period of madness. Talked about the importance of being calm, being still during the time of the solstice. Calm your body and your mind. Talked about the time that should be taken to fast during the day and to pray or meditate at night. Why pray or meditate at night? During the evening, think about this. Let me give you another example. The radio station that I was on this afternoon, BLS? They're LIB, okay. LIB is an AM station, okay? And if you understand anything about the electronics of radio broadcasting, most AM stations that are at a certain end of the radio frequency that broadcast at a certain level of power must go off at sundown. Why? Because when the sun sets, there's a different quality of electromagnetic energy that surrounds the earth. And if you continue to broadcast at that frequency, then your signal, your radio signal, is going to begin to cross over to other signals. That's right. So as a means of preventing that from happening, that station must shut down. Now, your mind is just like that radio transmitter. Your mind is just like that radio receiver. And during the evening, when the sun goes down, the frequency changes. And whatever you focus your frequency on, whatever dial you turn, you know, that spiritual meter in your brain to, is what you're going to begin to bring to yourself. It represents the signal that you're going to begin to tune into. You'll get voices. You'll get flashes of inspiration. There'll be little coincidences occurring in your life that will direct you to do certain things. And one of the things you have to realize is that there is no such thing as coincidence. There's no such thing as chance, coincidence, or accident in the universe ruled by law and divine order. Everything happens for a reason. Do you understand? Everything happens for a reason. So with this thing called a mind, you can begin to tune in certain levels of consciousness which will change your thinking and your behavior. Adolf Hitler had a habit of holding some of his most important speeches during the evening. Why? Because Hitler, who was a profound student of metaphysical and esoteric phenomenon, knew that in the evening, lesser minds are more susceptible or more easily influenced by powerful minds. It is a time when your mind is more susceptible to influence. So if it's your mind, then you might as well assume responsibility for influencing it. It's yours. What you gonna do with it? Over the past 28 years rather, Kwanzaa has evolved as an instrument for spiritual transformation. By that I mean it allows us to celebrate our African heritage during a season of high spiritual energy. The challenge for us, if you understand the 7 principles that we are directed to focus our consciousness on, are principles that can be and should be manifested every day of your life. So the timing of this particular celebration is of significant importance. Understand the principles and incorporate them in your life. But at the same time that we have grown to celebrate Kwanzaa, there are those outside of the community who wish to commercialize it. They want to commercialize it. Why? Because it will allow them to co-opt your energy and begin to steer you in another direction. See, this whole thing that we call life at this particular point in time in history is a struggle for power, is a struggle for energy. It is a struggle for consciousness. I do believe that we are struggling for our souls. And either you are going to realize that and be an active participant in seeing to it that you stay focused on your goal. Focused on the goals of your children and family. Focused on the goals for your community. That's what the objective is. But those who understand the potential that exists within the mind, the body, and the spirit of African people are afraid of you all even becoming aware of this reality. And so roadblocks will be placed in your way at every turn in order to make it difficult for you to do what God created you here on earth to do. Very simple process. Life is not complicated. We make it complicated by turning our backs on certain principles that our ancestors gave us. The knowledge is already right before your very eyes. The question is, do you have the eyes to see it? They are speaking to you. Your ancestors are speaking to you all the time. The question is, can you hear them?
All right. There you go.
If you understand who we are and where we come from, if you understand the nature of the universe in which we live, then you can become an instrument through which the ancestors will speak. A couple of years ago, we had Teofilo Obenga speaking for us in Washington, D.C. One of the most profound things that Obenga said that evening, in looking out into the audience at us, and talking about the spiritual nature of the people of ancient Kemet, the spiritual nature of African people, he said, looking at us, that we are the ancestors. They live in each one of you. The question is, do you realize who you have inside of you? What spirits you have around you? The truth is all around us. But in order to experience it, we must do what Brother Listervelt suggested that we do. In his poem, The Origin of Things, Brother Listervelt said that we must sharpen our eye and tune our ear so that we will know what we see and understand what we hear. We live in a world that is full of deception, full of lies. We live in a world in which the truth stands right before us. It speaks to us at night. But in order for us to uncover the truth, we must do, as James Weldon Johnson suggested, we must be true to ourselves, true to our God, and true to our native land. That's the solution. That's the answer. It doesn't require a whole lot of work or energy. It's very simple. Someone had mentioned earlier about us working with our children. I talked to a brother around the corner before the program. He was asking me about my daughter and he was telling me about some of the things that he was doing with his son. And he asked me about the work that I was doing with my daughter, about some of the books that we've written. And I shared with him very honestly that one of the reasons why I've cultivated this relationship with my daughter is because I love her, but also I love myself. And I understand 30 or 40 years from now, my daughter may be responsible for taking care of me. All right. And how she cares for me in the future is going to be determined by how I care for her today. Because she's going to be thinking all of her life. She's going to be thinking about the time that I spent with her and the things that we did together. And if more of those memories are negative than they are positive, then she will have little desire to want me to be around her in my old age. So understanding, these principles of ma'at or karma, cause and effect, you create the events that will help shape your destiny. You have the power and the ability. One of the things that I've chosen to do is to exercise my power. Not just for myself, for my daughter, and for the grandchildren or great-grandchildren that she will produce. If I do my job well today, then I can be assured that she will raise her children in a manner that will allow them to become active participants in their liberation. Then they will raise their children to continue the struggle. If you understand the reality that life is cyclical, if you understand this whole process of the ancestors, and the ancestors are born in us, then at some point in time, when we die, then our spirit will be reborn in a great-grandchild or a great-great-grandchild at some point in time in the near future. If you understand that, then what you do today will determine your quality of life in the future. You ain't got no time to waste. All right. You've got no time to play around. All right. What you have to begin to do right now, sisters and brothers, is to devote yourself, to your family, and your community. The whole idea, let me just share with you briefly about this book, because I'm real proud about our latest project between my daughter and I. Africa on My Mind, Reflections of My Second Trip, is a book that talks specifically about the trip that we made to West Africa 2 years ago, a trip to Ghana, Senegal, Gambia, and the Ivory Coast. The first part of the book is told through the eyes of my daughter, in which she talks about what she saw, what we did each day, the visits to Goree Island, the visits to Elmina Castle, Elmina Dungeon, Cape Coast Dungeon. The last part of the book, the last chapter of the book, consists of a conversation between my daughter and I. And in this conversation, I attempt to fulfill my responsibility to her to help her understand why we went on that trip. to help her understand the importance of her history and her culture. The impetus for this conversation came about as a result of an incident that occurred as we were driving back from Kennedy Airport to our home in Maryland after we returned from the trip. Driving on the highway, stopped at a rest house in Maryland, and there were about 5 people, 5 of us in the van who had gone on the trip from the Washington area. We were driving back, and we were all very excited to be back home, all right? Very glad to sleep in our own beds, all right? We were all very excited, too, about the experiences that we had, the people that we met, the things that we bought. Stopped at the rest stop. I went in to use the restroom, came back out, and had to tell the folk in the van that I saw in the restroom a note that said, "Death to all niggers, support the Ku Klux Klan." And I had to remind them that even though we're glad to be back in America, there are people living in America today who are no different than the people who enslaved our ancestors 400 years ago. We can never forget that. We can never forget that. And so one of the things that we attempted to do in this book was to put a face on the nameless victims of the Maafa, to make it a personal experience so that we can begin, so the reader could begin to understand that it wasn't just some Africans who were kidnapped and murdered and lynched and raped and beaten to death 300 years ago, 400 years ago. It was men, fathers, mothers, and children, families that were torn apart because of the greed of others. We have an obligation and a responsibility to honor the memory of those people who died, to let them know that they have not died in vain, and to ensure that these actions will never be carried out again against African people. It's important that we understand, again, some very basic realities. Very basic realities. African people living in America, African people living in Brooklyn today are the wealthiest and best educated African people on the planet. That's the truth. There are people on the continent who would give anything to get an opportunity to come here. Why? Because they know something that we seem to have forgotten. That this, as bad as America is one of the best places in the world to live at this particular point in time in history. That's a reality. We have opportunities here that folk on the continent, folk in Asia will never have. You've got access to money, you've got access to education, to knowledge, you've got access to technology. So the question is, what you doing with it? There's no reason on earth for us to be in the condition that we're in. None whatsoever. So again, the challenge that I have to put to you all this evening is that you got to move beyond saying Hotep. You got to move beyond just coming to the lectures and talking about how bad the lecture was. It means nothing if you all can't begin to take this knowledge and information and use it to change the quality of life. Amen. That's what your ancestors said, that you have the ability to do, the right to do. You have the power, the right to change the world overnight. And it begins first with you changing your mind. Nobody can take that away from you. They can try, but they can never take it away from you. At this point in time, the only thing that I can do, sisters and brothers, is to ask you to take the time during this high holiday season to get to know yourself and to realize that you have options in this life. You are not at the mercy of the mayor, of the president, or anyone else. To begin to realize that the creative spirit lives within and is always there to guide you, to direct you. The question is, it responds to the nature of your thoughts. What are you thinking? And if your thoughts aren't what they should be, then understand the significance of Sankofa. Very simple. Very simple symbol, very simple concept. You can always go back and correct your mistakes. You can always correct your mistake. That little egg in the mouth of the bird is symbolic of a potential life, potential growth, potential development. The head looks back to get the knowledge, but the feet face forward to say, this is where you've got to go. Use the knowledge of the past to correct your mistakes. Use the knowledge of the past to learn what it is that you have the potential to do, and then boldly go where African people need to go, and to free ourselves and to make our children proud to be African people. That's what we've got to do, sisters and brothers. Let's do it. Let's be about the business of lifting ourselves up, inspiring ourselves, and change the nature of the world. All right. And if you do that, the next time I come back, I can talk about something different. All right? We can talk about what we're going to do now that we have focused that energy. The types of things that we need to be building in order to take over Africa right now. And I'll close on this note. But I want you all to be aware of the fact that right now, West Africa is in a position to be taken over either by you, African Americans, or Europeans. Africa is at a crossroads today. And if you all fall down on the job and don't do your work, Africa will be recolonized within the next 25 years. Brothers and sisters on the continent are asking you all to come and to invest in the land, invest in businesses, to begin to take advantage of opportunities over there that you will never be able to take advantage of over here. And you need to seriously begin to investigate the possibilities. Nana Sapong is coming into the States this coming weekend. Africans from Ghana have been coming to the States. Rawlings was here last month, meeting with African Americans throughout the United States, telling you all the door is open for you to come home. But you can't come home half-stepping. You can't come home with your hand out, asking for a handout. You all got the knowledge. You got the technology. You've got the experience. They want you to work with them so that we all can be lifted up, so that we all can free ourselves. That's what time it is, sisters and brothers. And if we don't do it this time, then we don't need to play around anymore. And we don't need to blame anybody for our shortcomings. Very simple reality. Very basic truth. Either we're going to use what the ancestors gave us to free ourselves and transform the world, or we're going to have to be quiet. And if the ancestors don't make us shut up, the Europeans will, because we're at a very serious crossroads now. We've been talking about this African consciousness goes in cycles. If you're aware of certain patterns in history, generally goes in a 30-year cycle. And what happens traditionally is that we come to a fork in the road. And either we apply those principles that we've just learned, or we backtrack. And we're at a point in time where we really don't have a whole lot of time. Either we're going to start being serious about ourselves, about our families, about our communities, about our nations, or the European is going to do what he was put here on earth to do, make our lives miserable. But I got confidence in you. I do. I really do. I got faith in my people. Because of everything that we've been through, we still have our minds intact. We still have our souls intact. And all we need is just a small number of sisters and brothers to make a dedication, to be honest and serious, and to begin to take care of business. And then what you will find is that those who have been standing on the sidelines, those who have been straddling the fence, will begin to see that as a result of you changing your consciousness, as a result of you changing your mind, your life has changed. And they're going to come to you and want to do whatever it is that you're doing. You're in a position right now to transform the world. You don't have to look outside. Everything is right here. Take the time to know yourself and free yourself, and I'll see you when we get on the other side. Hotep.